agenda. So please do. So this is kind of an ad hoc committee, I guess. No, it's not. So we have it.
Yeah, it's basically just our comms presentation and then other outreach events.
That's typically all it really goes. Yes. Pick it up and turn it over to staff. So that's usually what happens. So, but I know there's a few things that as we go through that, I'm sure other folks will chime in. So.
Well, excited to be with you all here this morning and our first information and outreach committee meeting. And I know this is new for some of you, it's new for us as well. So looking forward to working through all of this with you as our external affairs team presents a lot of the things we've been working on. So before we dive in, I know that we're going to touch upon all of the events that we have planned for the coming year and ways that we're going to engage with our constituents virtually and in person. But before that, we wanted to share, and I'll start sharing my screen here, our new communication strategies that we've been working on with Andy that are going to guide how our messaging is brought forward to the public when we're out giving presentations, doing in-person events, our seminars, virtual or lunches, etc. So we've come up with some new messaging pillar concepts that we'd like to go over with you. I'm just going to kind of run through this presentation, but then at the end, I'd love to open it up for discussion and hear your thoughts. So without further ado. So when Lindsay and I were hired, we were tasked with developing ways to better communicate who the River District is, what we do, and why that work is important for the public. And as you all directors already well know, the River District serves a very critical function to keep water flowing on the West Slope. But when we were founded in 1937, the issues, although they remain essential to what the River District does, they're not the same issues that we're facing today. Our founders probably couldn't fathom the things that we're dealing with and the difficulties that we're being tasked with now. And so our mission holds even more weight than ever before. And within the expanding communities of the West writ large and Western Colorado, only a select few seem to know this, seem to know who we are and what we do and why our work is so essential to their future. But in the words of our general manager, this is our generation's time to innovate. So we're excited to present a new strategic communications plan that's being drafted with this in mind, to not only advance the goals of our team to expand our audiences across all of our platforms, but also to strengthen the River District's influence as educators, as advisors, as funders, and as catalysts for change. And so as such, we have goals for River District communications in 2022. First and foremost is to ensure water security for our constituents. This is the foundational cornerstone of the River District's mission and remains the driving force for all of our efforts. So we don't want to lose sight of this. This is number one.
And here's where I want to kind of interject. Maybe I'm getting too early, but how?
We have,
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be, so part of, these are the goals, and then we'll be going through the kind of new messaging pillar concepts that are going to then work to be implemented in different campaigns and at different events. So these are just kind of what's driving us in these new messages. The second one is to provide critical education and engagement to our constituents and to those that affect West Slope water users. So front range water users are obviously a big part of that. So we want to keep that in mind, that we're communicating not only and educating not only our constituents, but the people who are affecting our constituents. And for too long, water has been a fairly inaccessible topic to the general public. So, but an exponentially growing population, especially on the Front Range, needs to understand the great impacts their actions have on our diminishing resource. So the source of our culture, our economics, our livelihoods, it's water. And so we'll discuss a specific campaign at the end that's designed to address this goal specifically. And the third one is to provide leadership and guidance to decision makers acting on behalf of Colorado's water users within and across state lines. So our interstate work and compact compliance has obviously been a big topic of discussion. It's always been a part of the River District's efforts. But as conditions and forecasts throughout the greater Colorado River Basin continue to look bleak, we need to ensure that we're seen and known as leaders within interstate negotiations and the allocation of Colorado's water to protect our West Slope constituents. So highlighted even further by DK's presentation yesterday on hydrology. So our predecessors here, the last external affairs team, as they were gearing up for the 7A campaign, they crafted 7 messaging pillars to guide the work and communications of the organization. And these 7 pillars remain foundational to the work that we're doing, but because the 7A campaign was focused on the internal efforts within the district, getting the voters within our boundaries to understand what we're doing and what our priorities were for the mill levy, it's very much an internally focused pillar statement. So we're recognizing that a lot of our work and messaging moving forward must address some of the broader issues and goals that we're currently facing. So that's why the external affairs team, as we've been working with Andy to create this new communication strategic plan, recommended adding several new messaging pillars to fill the gaps and better convey the essential work that we have at hand. And the first one of these pillar concepts is partnerships and next generation innovation. This one, we realized as a new team, again, that our current pillars don't include, they were created to help get 7A across the finish line and create a community funding partnership. But we realized that we haven't actually recognized very intentionally the success that has been the community funding partnership in our foundational pillar messaging work. So the passing ballot measure 7A emphasized the River District's ability to bring strange bedfellows together across the West Slope for a common good, as our colleague Zane loves to talk about strange bedfellows coming together. And the community funding partnership builds on that legacy and has become this flagship program of the River District and its commitment to the people of Western Colorado. So we want our messaging to recognize this outright and shine a light on the positive opportunities and solutions and already great successes that have come from this program. That we're facilitating these partnerships, these new innovative strategies for confronting the difficult challenges we're facing across our district. And in a world of social media doom scrolling, as people are seeing all the issues that are coming up online, they need this beacon of hope for what's possible if people across different interest groups and user groups come together. And communities and others that follow this model will be stronger for it. So we want to make sure that this is a consistent drumbeat in our messaging. So another area that a messaging we saw need for some more direct language centers on water conservation. And the phrase hotter, drier future has been really well integrated into a lot of our external communications and provides a really great gateway for discussing the immense water supply challenges our region faces. But we want to ensure that we're communicating the importance of water conservation as a tool for our biggest water industries, agriculture, municipalities, to adapt and improve community durability within our changing climate. And this messaging will be essential to convey on both the Front Range and the Western Slope. So we'll talk a little bit more again about that campaign coming up, but building in conservation for adaptation in our water systems, wherever they might affect Colorado River water and tributary flows, needs to be taken to ensure a strong and sustainable future for our way of life. Okay, headwaters economics. This third pillar focus emphasizes the really unique position that we have here in Colorado as part of the Colorado River Basin as a whole, and also within a changing hydrologic system, again, as all of our hydrology reports have been pointing out. Many of you know this fun factoid, probably have heard it in a lot of our presentations, but if the Colorado River Basin were its own economy, it would be the 7th largest in the world, with 40 million people relying on its waters. And over 65% of that huge economy is right here starts right here in our river district. And the flows that come from our snowpack mountain headwaters that provide that 65%, they've been feeling the weight of aridification and climate change, as we've all been seeing. And Western Coloradans in particular, and especially our cornerstone agricultural producers, they've been facing drought and shortages for a great deal longer than a lot of their counterparts downstream. So we're the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. We're the first link in a vital chain that represents the health and vitality of this huge, important region and our region locally. So we must continue to lead by example, and because it all starts here. And this is a phrase that you'll be hearing a lot of in Water Education Colorado's current Water 22 campaign. This is their tagline that they've created that kind of we helped direct. And so we'll be using that phrase when we're talking about how important it is to think about what the West Slope brings in terms of our economies and our culture. It's been built on the back of local agriculture, recreation, and the natural environment. And the mounting challenges we face for Western water as a whole threaten these core aspects of our communities. And so it's our job and our responsibility to ensure a clear understanding of these threats and vulnerabilities to this vital link in the chain. And through our communications, we must ensure that water users, both within and outside of our district, see the challenges facing our system and see how their actions impact the Western Slope and how the economic and cultural health of other regions depend on the health of ours here. And that brings me to the fourth recommended pillar focus, which is healthy watersheds. Now, we do already have language currently in our original 7 pillars and also in the project categories for our community funding partnership that touches on this topic. But we see adding this as an intentional pillar focus as an opportunity to help our constituents and others understand the link between our water and the land that it's tied to. So this messaging is a chance to bring together often siloed topics when we're talking about, the mega fires that are decimating our forest watersheds, to aridification of soils and soil health, talking about productive agriculture and the local food that it brings to our region and beyond. Our West Slope future depends upon planning and management that acknowledges that our soils, land, and water are intimately connected. And we see this as an opportunity to also be proactive rather than just reactive. Things like the fires and landslides and all of that, where it's easy to talk about those being the symptoms of these greater problems. But when we're talking about this as a messaging pillar, we can focus on mitigation, on prevention, and the community funding partnership projects that allow us to build strong adaptive practices and face this stuff head on before other events like that happen and devastate communities. So it's an opportunity for the River District to lead by example again in all our work facets for bold, big picture innovation.
Can I just ask, might we add forest into that litany? So
Yes.
land, water, and just forests are unique in their spot in there.
Certainly, yeah, this is just a small snapshot. We'll be sending out once we finalize the actual communication strategic plan language.
But I think forest is a good suggestion.
Yes.
And perhaps emphasizing agriculture as well.
Agreed.
I think
Yeah.
Agricultural lands or something.
Yes, yeah, great suggestions. We will integrate. So lastly, after going over all of those pillar focus concepts, I just want to touch upon a specific campaign we'll be working on this year, starting this year, to tie together these new pillars of messaging goals. The direct-to-consumer Front Range campaign will be the beginning of a multi-year education and advocacy effort led by the district, targeted directly to Front Range water users starting in Boulder and Laramie counties. Front Range is obviously a vast space, so we're starting there. We're going to kind of move our way, see how it does, and adapt our strategies accordingly. But the explosion of growth, as we've mentioned, and everyone knows in Front Range residents, it hasn't come as new people have come. They haven't been given education about where their water comes from, which is here on the Western Slope, and how their water use affects us all. And these Coloradans need to understand that the health of our communities is directly tied to the health, or the health of their communities, I should say, is directly tied to the health of ours here on the Western Slope. They value all of these different cultural aspects. People move to Colorado because they love recreation, they love fishing, they love skiing. They value the beauty of the Rocky Mountains and the rivers and streams that are part of that and the snowpack. But they don't understand how they're being on the Front Range and using the water that comes from the Western Slope will affect those cultural values that they have. So that's why we're going to be targeting them specifically to show that though we have a continental divide between us, our water still connects us all. And so the external affairs team will execute this campaign in 2 phases. We'll strategically partner with external organizations on both sides of the divide to reach the intended audiences that we have. And the first phase centers around this water education because, again, Front Range residents, they won't be inspired to action to do anything about how they're looking at water and using their water if they don't know where it comes from and then how that affects the rest of the chain. So education is first and foremost. And then phase 2 is an action follow-up. So once water users in these communities have a better understanding of this west slope, east slope connectivity, we'll work with partners and their audiences and directly also advocate to relevant elected officials for improved conservation measures across these Front Range areas. We aim to also integrate polling before and after the 2 phases of the campaigns to see whether this outreach has had a measurable effect on Front Range water user knowledge and engagement. So I'm gonna leave it at that, keeping it pretty high level, but I would love to open it up to questions and discussion. Would love to hear your thoughts. So thank you so much for your presenting our strategies.
Mario, thanks for doing that. I do want to mention on this direct to consumer campaign, it is something I think the district has contemplated before and even engaged in a bit with the I don't know if anybody remembers the graphic that, I forget the phrase, the tagline that came with the graphic, with the river with the faucet coming out of it and there was shower and that was all over, bus stops in the greater Denver area and other things. This is, I'm hoping, a little bit more strategic and intended to actually end up in concrete action. And it comes from a conversation I had particularly with Brad Lynn in June, when I called him and said, your guys' pumping is about to kill fish in the upper Colorado River. Do you really want that to happen? Can you turn down the Windy Gap project so that the river actually doesn't exceed the level where our economy is decimated in the upper Colorado River? He said, hey, I hear you. I know we've got lots of water out here. I happened to catch him as he was on his way in mid-June on his way out to finally plant his corn because it had been so wet on his field he couldn't get out there. So I said, look, what can we do to fix this? He says, I don't really have any control. The municipalities have placed their orders and I have to fulfill it as a sub-district. So it's really the municipalities who can control how they demand water out of the municipal sub-district within the gap, and how they, the end users can control their political electeds as to how they place those orders and how they impact the Colorado River. There are an awful lot of folks who are in the Front Range who consider themselves, environmentally minded, love to eat the corn, love to eat cows and peaches, but have no idea that their front lawns and their water and their irrigated medians come from the Colorado River. And so they don't connect the 2 right now. And I think it's a long range effort. It's not going to, this is something that will take years to affect change. But I don't think at this point we have a choice. And that's where it's coming, just to help explain why I think we're headed this way. Very supportive of Mario and Lindsay coming up with this effort. Give a little back.
You're talking partnerships, who are you talking about?
So that's something that it's a list that we have some starters on. I think at least for East Slope partners, we've had some conversations with folks at Resource Central about who do a lot of work in terms of replacing sod and bluegrass lawns out on the Front Range, as well as starting native gardens and staging and things like that. So there's some efforts in terms of the action phase that we could work with them on that. I think also certain NGOs on the Front Range to target those cultural interests that we were talking about in terms of local people who are interested in, eating local and or have those recreation focused cultural touch points that are really important to them. So, there are a lot of nonprofits that have huge, membership bases out on Front Range. So figuring out those partnerships is really important. And then also working with, other local organizations like the River District, both here and on the Eastern Slope, to make sure that we're communicating the importance of these efforts.
And really, I mean, on the West Slope, we're looking at partners, and we have not reached out to them one to get the board. So we're talking our Grand Valley water providers, Youth Water, Eagle River Water and Sand. We're hoping we can get even OMID and Grand Valley water users and others on board to help us promote this. And you know, up and down the river, we will reach out to counties and see if they're interested in promoting this. It similar to 7A needs to be a broadly backed, not solely an NGO effort and not solely a water provider effort, but one that really ties everybody together.
Thank you. But is it just West Slope that we need to tie together, or do we need to work the entire state together?
Well, I will say that I don't want the message watered down. No comment.
I get it.
And so every time we end up working together with other front range entities and the state in particular, we come up with milk toast. We come up with, oh, you can't say that. Oh, you can't say that we're responsible for killing fish. We intend to say, look, your exports from the Colorado River are killing fish. And Northern's not going to want to jump on board. The CWCB isn't going to endorse that message. Colorado Education, Water Education Colorado is not going to endorse that message. It's true. We're going to make sure every statement we say is factually true, but we are going to be in people's face in a way that the CWCB and the rest of those folks are not doing. That's
I like
okay. I mean, I just to be clear, you know, but I want the board direction. That's our vision, but I want to make sure that it makes sense. And I think we've got, you know, we've had some preliminary discussions with some of the NGOs about this. And they are very interested. They understand the importance of it and the imperative. I think our water providers will as well along the main center of Colorado. I think it's critical. I know Zane has his hand up.
Thanks, Andy. I think you touched on one of the points I was going to make was that I think the coalition that pursues any sort of campaign like this needs to be similar to what we were able to assemble around 7A. We need a diverse group of stakeholders that's willing to talk about the impacts of front range exports on our state's namesake river. I was also just going to point out that, and Taylor may have some understanding or knowledge of this, the Water for Colorado, which is a coalition of NGOs, has done some pretty substantial polling over recent years, identifying the connection that many urban front range residents have to the Western Slope and specifically the Colorado River. And while many folks may only get over to the Western Slope a few times a year, you think about working families in the Tri-County area or the Tri-City area in the Northern Front Range, they're not spending a substantial amount of time on the Western Slope. But polling that we've seen and that Water for Colorado has conducted, and I think it's an excellent polling effort, has identified that the Colorado River and Western Slope culture is part of their identity as Coloradoans. And so I see an opportunity to tug on their heartstrings and to do what we can to ensure that they understand that their water use does impact the Western Slope and specifically impacts and is threatening the future viability of our state's namesake river. So with that, I think Andy covered most of everything I wanted to say. I just wanted to add a little cherry on top.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. One, I think we're seeing an increase in homeowners too from the Front Range on the Western Slope. So I think that would be another kind of angle, is that they're invested in both parts of the state. And so how can we kind of amplify that? The other point though, it's still early, so I'm like, wait, what was I gonna say? There's a lot of groups that do talks and conferences. Like there's a CSU Water Center does a a leadership series for water, and like I get asked to speak every year. That would be the great opportunity to just look for those kind of strategic opportunities to speak with those efforts, because then you're getting people who are actually going to be decision makers one day and get them early.
One interesting Houston Point?
We've already been reached out to by a group that does golf courses. Their national conference ones are custom comes in November. So that'll actually happen with that, but we'll work out. And the other thing I just want to summarize to right after what we were talking about last night with the word collaboration, not being in favor that there's. We don't want to plan to collaborate about the message. We want to collaborate about accessing the channels that are already in place. And I think that's summarized what Andy was saying too. We want our message, but leaning on some of the established pathways that other groups have and their audiences can access.
Reading, you got your hand up, right?
Yes, I'm finding more and more when, like, people in the Rio Grande, they think there's only one compact in Colorado. It's for the Rio Grande. They're shocked that the river, the Colorado River also has a compact, and now Nebraska. I don't know that we need to hit it hard, but I think that's something, if you're in a small circle and you don't know what's across the line, people don't realize that we're being tugged in all directions. And so I don't know if we need to incorporate that in there too. Like I said, not maybe a whole lot, but just so that people from the east slope that are moving to the west slope know that there's a whole nother world out there. So I think the education part is great.
Yeah, is there a slot in here to provide some messaging about connecting policymaking, land planning with water supply? So those things have typically been really separate. So Sonoran Institute's been doing some work, but the messaging to individual constituents on the Front Range may not make any difference if the people who make decisions about land use don't say you can't have an acre of turf for your land there. So, and policymakers, especially I think on the Front Range, just look to the water providers for that letter to serve, which they are always going to get. So there's got to be a connection between what's the actual supply, which is coming from the western slope, and how does that affect what you're doing with land use planning. It's been a really tough nut to crack, and I think this messaging could make people think about that as well.
I think we need to be cautious of that though. We've got some junior basins that are starting to, they're continuing to evolve their land use plan efforts. Some are actually putting land into use in different batches because the land is sitting there. I don't know if that is line what you're kind of talking about there or not, because I guess I see what's happening in Rio Blanco County. I mean, yeah, you've got housing development there, but you also got new and innovative agriculture starting to come in. Because you have a change in economics, so we have to do something.
Right. I think that's great. And if your priority is new and innovative ag, and that's where you should be directing your water supplies and not to mediums and.
Correct.
But I think really,
Okay.
especially thinking about the Front Range, for the policymakers to feel like they have a role in thinking about water, which they could.
And Kathy, if you haven't seen the packet already, Amy will be talking later today about a CFP proposal with the Sonoran Institute to work on urban land use planning on the west slope.
Right.
And tying water to land use planning here, helping our municipalities, providing them some capacity to help figure out what the best land use codes are for their constituents to reduce their. So, we're not just picking on the Front Range. We're trying to help all, everybody.
I think if I may chime in on the policy side there's a bill we're going to consider during the state affairs conversation today, establishing a state turf, non-essential turf removal bill. I think there will be some, if the stars align correctly, and if we can help them align, that there may be some opportunities to engage Front Range water users to advocate for similar policies at the state level in future years. And I think that's more in the tier 2 side of I think the first side of this campaign should be education and again, tugging on the heartstrings and getting folks aware of how their water use impacts us on the western slope. phase 2 or tier 2 of that plan should be getting them to act on it and do something, whether it be call their legislators or their board of the Northern Water Conservancy District or whatever it may be. I think there are clearly some advocacy opportunities that could align with state policy efforts quite well.
As we move forward, though, I think what you're proposing here is a rather aggressive approach, but I think it's what we need to do. Because the situation downriver and our present region isn't improving anytime soon. And I guess we've been playing for years where we're playing not to lose, but now we're playing to win. And I think that's a mindset that I take carried over as well, because I feel like I'm pinning against the wall to a certain degree, and really, it is real. It's really what I'm doing. I am pinning against the wall. And we've got to make an aggressive change like this, so I'm encouraged by it as well. Are we looking at just messaging to where you're looking at just your external affairs team kind of doing this, or is this going to be kind of shared across the rest of the staff? They may not have full expertise that you have here, but they're going to understand that, hey, you need to tackle these situations when they arise. That's the most opportune moment.
That's a great point, George. Thank you. And yeah, part of our plan is implementing this whole communication strategic plan, and not just the front range campaign aspect of it, but these messaging pillars is training the rest of our staff, because a lot of our staff go out and make presentations and engaging with the world there. They're being asked by community groups and reporters to comment on these things, and so we'll have a training regimen that will walk staff through to make sure we're all on the same page.
And I suggest that perhaps our board should get the same training, because we get asked to speak to places as well. And I think it would be useful to have the board be able to participate. in some of this messaging.
Facts and message. Yeah, I totally agree with you. We can work on that. And I would say, one of the things I learned when I came into the position of the district, talking to our constituents, was frequently that the messages coming out of the river district varied depending upon which staff member you're talking to. And so I largely, with Zane's help, focused on getting everybody on the same message. It was particularly important when 7A was coming. And I think our current team is going to launch that even more. And I think it's really critical that we utilize the megaphones we have. And I think Marty's point board is one of our megaphones, no offense, but let's get it all on the same page. And that's
All right, well, thank you all so much, directors, for your thoughts and comments and great suggestions. We will work to incorporate all of that as we move forward and finalize this strategic plan more officially, and we'll send out that language as well to all of you once that's completed. So, but this messaging that we just walked through is also going to be incorporated, as we've been talking about, being out in the communities. And so part of our plan also is just talking about our educational programs and activities and planning out, we're looking forward to 2022 being, as a new team, being out in our district and going to each of your counties and meeting the constituents head on and having conversations and listening to each county, each region has very unique struggles that they're dealing with. A lot of them can be encompassed, we're just looking at water issues in general, but I know that each region is unique in terms of the landscape and the communities. And so we want to get out there and be able to hear what they're doing. So we have some virtual events planned, but we also are looking forward to doing a lot of on the ground work as well. And so I'm going to kick it over to Lindsay to talk a little bit about some of those events that we have planned.
Sure, yeah, and none of these will sound all that innovative. We're sort of keeping up what's working or what worked in the past pre-pandemic. So if it's not broke. One of the things is the water seminar. We have a date locked in already. It's September 16th. It'll be here again. A lot of our new messaging is going to help sort of frame our approach, and we're going to look at who we need to have on that stage to echo those messages that we're working on. We'll have a little bit of feedback at that point for how it's landing across our district and across the Front Range. So there's a lot of exciting things that are going to be, the seminar will be this this broadcasting for it. Before that, however, most immediately, we are working on, let's see, because most immediately is a webinar coming up. I know there's no water with your lunch. Our goal is to keep up with one of those per quarter. So this will be the one for the winter quarter, and we'll focus on helping the snowpack, forecast the river. A lot of what DK was explaining yesterday with that 30-year shift and modeling and how that impacts the data. We really want to make sure that that piece, DK did a great job explaining that, and I want to find a way to make sure that that is incorporated in almost all of these events too. Like it says 105% of average, but the average is not the average that we did last year, and why that's really important to keep in mind. So that'll sort of be explained. We have Jeffrey Deems, Paul Miller, and Sarah Tessendorf helping us out with this upcoming webinar on February 22nd. After that, we are already well into the planning phases of our state of the river events. Our goal is to have, I think we actually landed on 11. We had 12 routine, but it'll be in-person events all across the population and constituent hubs in our 15 counties. The first set, I think, is actually going to be up in Route County and Moffett County at Steamboat and Craig. We are partnering with the Community Ag Alliance up there, and it should be a really fantastic event. They bring in local food producers or gardeners to help serve local food, and we're pretty excited about that. And I think I've reached out to multiple directors already about which ones they want to see in their counties. And so if you have any thoughts about those events, we really want to make them two things, really. One, we want them to get to know us as a new external affairs team, and some of the newer staff members who, even though they've been around a few years, were in virtual land for so long. So that's one of our primary goals, is to start working on relationship building and face recognition and that trust piece that so many of our predecessors did so well. But then the other is a listening phase. We want them to know that they can come to these events and be heard. So each unique area is going to approach that differently, and we welcome input from all of our directors on how those might look.
I just would suggest that we make a real effort to invite all the elected officials and county there. The attendees have often been the usual crowd who already know about water, and so of course they come and they're interested. That if we could start pulling in the policymakers as well. And those folks sometimes think water's too hard, you know, the water attorneys or the river district or somebody's taking care of that, and I think it would help get that message that, no, it's all of us, it's not too hard.
Just build on that. And I've always wondered, like Summit County, you get a lot of people. It's pretty amazing because you've got the river guides and the fishing guides. I mean, there's just the farmers. Have you thought about doing like a pre-session, like the last time it's been at the Summit, the pavilion down in Silverthorne? So there's 2 rooms. You could actually, I just wonder about like a 101, like a water 101, because it is hard. People do struggle. They don't feel comfortable asking questions.
That's a great idea.
So you could maybe do a tag team or like something in the afternoon that you offer. Just might be another way to reach people and make them more comfortable when they go to those meetings.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we're all about that messaging. We talk about it. We're trying to turn, so coming in new, it's been interesting. We've had to do all the steep learning curve that everyone on the outside hasn't done yet. So the amount of dedicated time that Mariella and I put into this, and look at what the lay people, what the electeds are having to do just to show up at the meeting and be heard. So we joke about it, but we're aiming for some of this information on the 5th grade meeting. What can we do this year, especially to bring this conversation to a lot of households that they thought they weren't welcome there, they didn't understand how to start, and making sure that we are still prioritizing those voices that have been showing up all of this time, that have that generational understanding of this complex situation. So it's really a balancing act. And again, I welcome all of you to these specific events because they're going to be so foundational in that understanding of building it.
Yeah, Taylor, I think that Water 101 tagging on the state of rivers might be a great opportunity there.
It's a 2 for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could just be a presentation of pre-built, even though we offer it.
Yeah.
We want it, kind of.
Yeah, but just be able to be there to answer questions. The other thing I would just suggest is don't let them go on too long. I was at one 3 or 4 years ago for Summit that was like 3 hours and people were like walking out and nobody wants to walk out. but-
So we have, I would say, I totally agree with you, having been to an awful lot of these.
Yeah.
Summit is a great example. We have partners, right? And the partners all want to talk.
Yeah.
And the partners sometimes talk way longer than we talk. And I'm probably biased, but I find sometimes stuff they're talking about is not all that interesting. And then it goes on forever. And then it's like, whoa.
You include everybody, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to be inclusive, but we're trying to, it's a hard balance, right? And so we will try, but
Yeah.
just keep in mind, especially in Summit County.
Well, I can help with that.
I think these are the counties in for only 2 hours total, so I've already talked to the River
Kendra.
watershed, yeah, Kendra, and,
Director Hawes, I remember the exact state of the river that you're talking about.
The Joe's around one.
I would say I remember it, but I actually fell asleep. so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say.
It's a long one.
We're hoping to do, as we're planning all of these, right now, we're mostly looking at evening schedule, 6 to 8, but building in time to have breaks, have breathing room, have listening sessions, in addition to, I think the Water 101 idea is great, and bringing in policy decision makers is a fantastic idea as well. So if we can build that into the beginning, and then our thought was also to have, we have funds in our EA budget to put towards each of these state of the river events and have food, have drinks, that sort of thing. And so have it be this more community focused event. So we'll have presentations, but we also want it to, face to face, sitting down and talking, just having those casual conversations. And like I said, listening to each community, the people in these communities and hearing what their concerns are so that we have a better understanding of that as well.
And can you let us know the dates right away? Because they've been scheduled sometimes when I can't come, which is a really bad show.
yes, we haven't scheduled people yet. Keep everybody up to date. We just
Yeah.
really settled dates from last week, so we'll be getting information.
We'll
out
get
as
those
soon as
dates out
possible. Yes,
as they get scheduled,
exactly,
especially for the director.
Yes, yeah, we want to make sure all of the associate art directors are able to participate.
And again, Kathy, in Eagle County, as you know, Eagle River Water and Sand, they are a huge part of, they put a lot of effort as a partner into that. So sometimes we don't necessarily put those dates.
Yes.
But they're great. I love their help. I love all the work they do.
But they're without a director right now, so there's a vacuum. You can step up.
So in addition to those events that we've mentioned, I think it's been brought up at previous board meetings, but I've been on the steering committee for Water Education Colorado's Water 22 campaign. And so that has been launched officially as of the January Colorado Water Congress, as some of you experienced. And I've been put in charge of a subcommittee that is called the Basin Beers Subcommittee, where we're going to be doing essentially outreach and engagement to breweries and all sort of, craft brewing related industries all across the state, focused on, the ones in each specific river basin within Colorado, working on different, bringing these educational messages to outreach events with each of them, and then also working on a competition to have a beer brewed in each river basin within Colorado to then have a competition at the end to draw attention to it. Beer is a great, Judge, yes,
I
definitely.
think he's exercising the chairman's prerogative.
Yeah, beer is over 90% water, and that water is a product of the land that it flows through, as I often said when I worked at the Oregon Brew Shed Alliance back in my old days. So I'm looking forward to bringing some of that into this, and also being able to infuse our river district priorities and goals and messaging into this effort within this broader campaign, and making sure that as we're participating in Water 22, that we're still able to highlight the issues that are important to the Western Slope. So beer is a great peacemaker and brings a lot of people to the table. So it's a great center point for talking about some really tough issues. And so I think it'll be a good part of that campaign that we can engage in and really build more relationships as well. So that's something that we'll be providing updates for as we go along, but it won't aiming for it not to take away at all from these other priorities that we've outlined. Do you want to talk about social and online engagement?
Sure. Yeah, nothing really excitingly new. We are maintaining our presence on all major social media channels. Andy wants to start his own TikTok channel, but I haven't talked about it. So we're, but Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Based on the bad dad stuff that my kids send me from TikTok, because I don't actually have a TikTok, but I get these things from my kids. I think I'm already on it. Based on everything, that, like, all these awkward dads on there. Yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
One of the shifts in our strategy is going to be related to geo-targeting, actually, because when we look at our followers on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, they are centralized in the hubs of Pleasant Springs and Mesa County and a little bit in Montrose, and we are obviously much bigger than that. So one of the things that we're going to be working on is actually using boosted ads based on specific geo-targeted areas, tying in with local events, asking for more partnership shares to those groups that are already established there. It sounds, sharing is very ephemeral, but we want people from an equal representation. I mean, the fact that Eagle and Stevo have very few identified followers on our Facebook, which is the one that has the most accurate geo-targeting, is not great. So this is where we talk about ourselves, where we kind of show who we are with our evergreen messaging from the pillars, with our CFP updates regularly, with relevant news stories. And so when we're talking about bringing a larger percentage of our constituency into a actionable understanding of who we are, we have to kind of prioritize it. And so we'll be doing a lot of that throughout the coming year. And let's see, I don't know that there's a lot of other updates on the social side of things.
I have a question about social media. We kind of know what you're talking about there. I follow you on just Facebook, social media. That's all I follow you on. And I like the little blurbs you give, but it doesn't show me where you're at, who you're visiting with. Would that help you with your messaging? If you could say, well, I'm up at Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, and get a picture of Stagecoach or their sign or with a member of their directors or their, I don't know, Mount Warner Water and Sanitation. You're at Eagle Water and Sanitation up there. You're in Delta County at an orchard looking over to irrigation. Just use that as your background rather than arbitrary. Beautiful scenic river, which is great, or a mountain, which is great. But that's not necessarily indicative to the constituents that you're serving.
So one of the things that you're hitting the head on is going to be addressed in our ongoing staff training is more pictures from people in the field. I want those. I absolutely want those. Right now, I have a set of beautiful photos, and so we're using those as much as we can. And then we're going to highlight with our staff the importance of facing people. And so whenever I have a partner that I can tag, I do, but not all of those water providers actually have a presence. And so sometimes I can't actually connect them. And most of the photos in our district folder, we have to work on identifying some of the geographical areas because they had in the files for a while, but one of the priorities is staff. If you're in the field, take a photo, tell me where you were, I'll share it.
Now, this is the world according to Al, okay? But there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, as some of you heard me talk about before, and not everything's picturesque. But yet that picturesque scene shares an awful lot of the story about what's reality here. So, I mean, that to me, showing something that's rather ugly, you're like, oh, I'd like to see that. That needs to be shown, though, to say that's what's really happening here. These are some of the water issues that we're dealing with.
Some of your algae.
I'm working on something with that, and I'm gonna shock and awe some people when I bring in a 5-gallon bucket. And I'm gonna plop it down your desk, I'm gonna say, no. Forgive me. I'll get off my soapbox and move on.
Now, I would take a picture of that bucket and share it. If you guys have photos as directors,
I have so many.
you can send them to me and I will work them into our social media strategy. I am 100% on board, and I believe what you're identifying is very important.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion, Ricker, and it ties into another field that we're working on in terms of working with Amy and the community funding partnership. And a goal of ours has also been to elevate the voice, the individual voices of our constituents across the district, and the stories of the hardships they're facing and the ugly scenes that they're dealing with, on their land and in their landscapes. But then also the solutions that we're working on in terms of the community funding partnership and those strategies. And so we, you approved that the contract that we have with Vital Films, and we've already been working on a video. In our general EA update, as we move into the full board meeting, we have, hopefully, if we can get the tech to work right, we have a sizzle reel trailer from Vital that we'd love to share with you. They're also working on a series of vignettes for us. So we're going to take those specific projects that have been in progress through the community funding partnership and tell those stories and highlight those individuals and partnerships and projects and how the River District is supporting this kind of innovative solutions to the issues that we're seeing out there. So we're going to have a lot more content coming up as that library builds through Vital Films. So we're really looking forward to working with Amy and Vital on that. And we'll have, I think videos are a way for people to really grab people's attention. You know, attention spans on social media are really difficult to grab these days. So having some positive messaging in addition to a lot of the other doom scrolling like that people are doing on social media. But I do agree with you, Director, that it's important to show the rough sides, that the issues that we're really facing. So
Some of these issues are not very short. I don't want to lead us down a rabbit hole, but I'm going to go back to the algae tour. Yes, you have the issue up there to where it impacts your fishery, but you have the end of user water tap in the house that still is suffering from the effects of that algae going through the water treatment works. Now through your taps, well, that creates drinking water quality issues as well. That's not part of the conversation. To me, that's a long story, but somehow that needs to get shared because that's part of it. And that's part of airification too that we're finding out, you know, things like that. So these are things that communities are dealing with.
Yeah.
And it's very expensive and very impactful.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to come back and again encourage, if you as directors have a story in your district that you feel like could use some amplification, my inbox is always open to those, so please. Even if it's just a photo that you want shared, or if it's something more complicated that you feel strongly about, let's open that communication, and Marielle and I can work with you to find out who you think needs to hear it and how they need to understand it better.
And the other thing I would encourage you to send to Nancy is if you find articles in your local paper or anything else you're reading that you think are relevant on water issues, I do it all the time. I'm reading newspapers and shooting over to the team and saying, hey, think about putting this in the newsroom. And I just would encourage, you know, they can't read everything. If you see something particularly of local interest that should be broadcast so people know what's going on, let's get it out.
Please.
Well, we call that the hot sheets. Your town or county or whatever it is on, you just made hot sheets. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you just made hot sheets. So now you're being spotlighted. So it's not a negative thing.
Well, should we give everybody a little time before the meeting starts?
All right, we'll wrap it up and adjourn.
Thanks, you guys. This is exciting.
Yeah.
Good for you.
It's fun. Our first
we're excited.
public information meeting.
Yeah.
Inaugural.
Inaugural.
Well, this worst 7.
There you go.